David Brewster here in an episode of Breaking Chords. This is the secret arpeggios of Racer X, and we've featured the music of Racer X and a lot of Paul Gilbert's ideas several times on this channel. There's 2 3-for-alls for Paul, also a Bruce Bouillet Three-For-All, the chords of Racer X, Chordplay episode, and also I did put together Breaking Chords where we looked at some of Paul's, string skipping arpeggios, which that's what this lesson's gonna, contain. But we're going to take it a little bit further and kind of, explore different sequences and licks and some different ideas and really tap into some of those really cool ideas and secrets that revolve around a lot of Racer X's music. So for me, Paul Gilbert's a really important guitarist because I've learned a lot of his educational and instructional material, instructional videos, his old guitar player lessons and various lessons in other magazines, and just tons of his stuff. I've got some transcription books, Mr. Big and some other things. But there's just something really eye-opening and inspiring about his approaches, the way he views, the fretboard, 3-note per string scales, string skipping, legato, all this stuff. His rhythms are great. His solos, of course, are, shreddy and great, especially back in the day. But definitely a lot of his material, it really opened my eyes and opened up my fretboard, to some new possibilities and new approaches and strategies, and it's just something I can't really emphasize enough. And if you haven't seen his first 2 instructional videos, Intense Rock 1 and Intense Rock 2, I highly recommend those, and those are actually really popular. I think I've read John Petrucci and Mark Tremonti, and there's a whole bunch of guitarists that totally dove into those videos too, and they're definitely they're full of information, but then they're also kind of wacky, and they kind of show, Paul's sense of humor and that side of his personality. But definitely the information and the licks and sequences and all the stuff that he breaks down, it's worth its weight in gold. It's awesome. All right, to get started, the first thing we have to do is pick a key, and I'm going to pick the key of D, which there's really no reason. I guess D minor is really what I'm targeting here, so think D minor. But there's really no reason. I guess it is the saddest of all keys. Thanks Nigel Tufnell, but there's really no reason. I just picked the key of D minor, technically. So think D minor, and then we're going to move to the 10th position right here, and there's a really common and popular, arpeggio fingering, especially for sweeping. Think Malmsteen for this, and it's right here. Right there we've got, basically D, F, A, D, F, hiding up there on the 13th fret on the high E. So in that position, there's the D minor arpeggio right there. But then we can basically, we're going to relocate this A, this single A on the B string right there on the 10th fret. We're going to relocate that to the 14th fret on the G string right there. And that's going to create the skip, between the strings. So we're going to have we're going to have one note on the D string right there on the 12th fret, and then this F and A is going to be on the G, skip over the B, and then you've got D and F there on the high E string. And we've talked about that fingering before, but it's the exact same arpeggio as this. We're playing it like this. Same thing. You can see I kind of moved, from one and between both those shapes, one and the other. So that's the first step, just kind of getting used to that D minor arpeggio right there. So if you're new to that string skipped arpeggio, that's going to feel really funky at first. And I've actually seen Paul demonstrate this to help people kind of get used to, playing that arpeggio or that sequence in the string skip. So think of D minor pentatonic right here, and we're just going to play a really typical legato kind of sequence using D minor pentatonic like this. And right there we're just basically playing the top, right? But what we're going to do is use that pattern but apply it to that arpeggio like this. And already it sounds like something Paul Gilbert would play. And it's basically that D minor arpeggio. But it's basically using that same kind of sequence we had with that minor pentatonic idea. Up next, we have three sequences that Paul likes to use, in his music a lot. And we're going to apply these to that D minor arpeggio, that string skip shape we just looked at. And Paul has way more than three, sequences. But these three do show up a lot in Racer X and Mr. Big Music, and also his, solo material. But we're going to take that same arpeggio, but instead of playing it like this, just straight up and down, instead of doing it like that, we're going to sequence it. We're going to mix those notes around in a different order, which is going to make it sound a little more musical and melodic and interesting. And we're going to do this. And already it starts sounding like Paul Gilbert. And slowly, that sequence is like this. So we're still using the same, same notes we were using before, but we're just mixing them around in a different order, like that. Now if we take that sequence and start on the lowest note instead of the highest note, we can kind of make a variation. It's almost the same thing, but that's going to be like this. And right there we're starting on this D note instead of that F way up there, but we're starting on this lower D and we're doing this. Now the last sequence actually starts in the middle, because we started on the highest note and also the lowest note, and those were both triplet, groupings of 3. And this one's actually 16th note, so it's groupings of 4, but something like this. So right there, we're starting in the middle on this A. Actually a really good one for your pinky, because you're kind of doubling up, that A to F stretch right there. You kind of hear that in there a lot. So now we're going to convert this minor arpeggio into major and also diminished, just to kind of explore, some other options and kind of expand, what we're doing. But, here was D minor. We're going to raise the third, right, to change from minor to major. So we're going to convert these Fs to F sharps. And there were 2 of them in that shape, right here, and up on the top too. So raise those to F sharp, and then you're going to convert the shape, and then suddenly, bam, it turns into D major. Simple alteration, minor to major. And then we can also, if we start back on this D minor arpeggio, we can find diminished this way too. Now to find diminished, we're going to take a minor arpeggio and we're going to lower the 5th, which that A is going to become magically A flat. And then we keep everything else the same, and there's D diminished. There was D diminished, and D minor, and also D major. So if we drift back to D minor and call that the 1 chord, let's investigate moving, through a chord progression. So now let's do a 1, in D minor. Let's go to the 5 chord, which is going to be A minor. All right, so just a 1, 5, and D minor. And if we go back to this arpeggio fingering we had, there's D minor. And if we move to A minor, we actually can keep the same fingering, just move everything over a set of strings and start on A right here. And there's A minor. We moved over because there's D. And then A. And that's a 1, 5, in D minor. So if we lock onto that A minor arpeggio and move it down a whole step, it's going to uncover the 4 chord, in D minor, and that's going to be G minor right there, because we had the 1, which is D, the 5, which is A, and then the 4 is going to be G. So there's A minor right here. Just move down a whole step, and there's G minor, and keep the same fingering, that same pattern. So there's G minor. Move it up a whole step. There's A minor. A set of strings, and there's D minor right there. So we just uncovered the 1, 4, 5 and D minor. So let's use one of those sequences that I showed earlier and run that through this progression. So let's do this one. That's like sequence number 2. So we're starting here in D minor. And then I moved to G minor and did the same sequence. And back to D minor. And then A minor. Alright, now that we've uncovered the 1, 4, 5 and D minor, let's change the 5 chord to A major, and that's going to kind of imply, D harmonic minor, which is definitely Yngwie approved, which immediately means it's also Paul Gilbert approved, because Paul Gilbert loves Yngwie and Van Halen and a ton of, great players. But if we change that A minor to A major, and we think back to, like when we had D minor and we changed to D major, like here's D minor, and there was D major right here. Well, if we basically apply that, over a set of strings, here's A minor. And then we can basically alter that by raising the thirds, C to C sharp, and then magically it becomes A major. So now let's explore that like this. There's D minor, G minor, D minor, and then A major, which has that really cool, harmonic minor kind of twist. So let's apply one of those sequences I showed earlier to this progression, and we're going to pick number 3, the one that starts in the middle, like this. That's going to wrap this episode of Breaking Chords with the secret arpeggios of Racer X. And really, these arpeggios aren't that big of a secret, especially if you've, dove into some of Paul Gilbert's instructional material, his videos, and some of his content, magazines and books. Because he's shared this stuff, since the 80s. Since Racer X was a band, he's been sharing this. The original Racer X, that is. But there's just something really interesting about his approach and his ideas and his licks and the way he breaks things down. And I know as soon as I started watching some of his videos and started really getting into his music, these things were clicking and these lights were kind of coming on where it was like, oh my gosh. And he really did help me kind of make some big breakthroughs with theory and music and scales and arpeggios and all sorts of stuff. Because I was really having trouble with it until I kind of saw the light through, Paul Gilbert's teaching, methods and his ideas, which have really helped me. So anyway, leave some feedback and comments. Please subscribe to my lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more content and material. Thank you.